Hello, everyone, and good evening. Welcome to our official opening for Nashville, A Pandemic Observed, which is a collaboration between the Vanderbilt Divinity Library and the Vanderbilt Divinity School. And this wonderful exhibit is going to be up from March 3rd until April 1st. And of course, the overall theme of this exhibit, as the title indicates, is the pandemic. But I think it's important to note that each photographer has selected vastly different worlds and scenes to share with us. Some, for instance, feature family and others scenes of nature. So just to give you a brief overview of how this evening will go, we are going to do this in two parts. We have two separate exciting and delicious panels prepared for you this evening. The first one will feature the photographers, and then we'll break and return for the second panel, which will feature some of our wonderful Vanderbilt faculty in conversation of another nature about this exhibit. I'm going to briefly introduce our photographers, and then we'll move into a video so that you all can see some of the photographs and get some of the artist statement as well. So I'll first talk about Joon Powell, who is actually the curator for this exhibit. And Joon grew up in Eastern North Carolina with a gaggle of sisters and parents who like to read and be outdoors. Joon also studied photography at RIT, Rochester Institute of Technology, and has been telling stories with photographs ever since for newspapers, nonprofits, and also for libraries and archives. And Joon's sort of guiding statement is to tell stories that would not otherwise be told and to make those stories a resource. And I will also mention that Joon is the archivist at Scarrett Bennett, and we at the Vanderbilt Divinity Library are super excited about working with her. Next, I'll talk about Dawn Majors, who is an award-winning photojournalist, who's also worked at the St. Louis Post-Dispatch for 8 years. Dawn is a native of Old Hickory, Tennessee, and she graduated from Western Kentucky University in Bowling Green with majors in both photojournalism and anthropology. People often ask why Dawn chooses to study both, or chose to study both, excuse me. And she said, I figured with both skills, I could always take pictures of people or their bones. So for photojournalism and anthropology, pictures and bones, or people and bones. As a photojournalist, she photographed everything from national politics to community events, and she currently serves, excitingly, as a state photographer for our precious state of Tennessee. And in this role, she provides high-quality photographic service for the offices of the governor and first lady and all state agencies and legislative bodies. John Partipilo has won numerous awards, including Best of Photojournalism Award for an essay of gangs in Tennessee, and first runner-up Pulitzer nomination for the 2010 flood. John has photographed many essays that have documented people's lives, including the war in Iraq, the Nashville flood in 2010, civil rights protests, the bombing on 2nd Avenue, and most recently, of course, the pandemic. John is also author of 2 photographic books, Cuba, My World Ends Here, and Rancho Beyond. Very cool. Last up, we have Bill Steber, who has documented blues culture in Mississippi for the last 20 years, chronicling the state's blues musicians, juke joints, churches, river baptisms, hoodoo practitioners, traditional farming methods, folk traditions, and other things that have given birth to the culture of the blues. The work is gathered in his work is gathered in his exhibit Stones in My Pathway, as well as in the pages of Living Blues magazine and other prominent publications. Bill is a native of Centerville, Tennessee, not terribly far from here, and was a staff photojournalist for the Tennessean from 1989 to 2004, where he won dozens of regional and national awards while shooting everything from national politics to New York runway fashion, come on, and the Super Bowl. His latest passion is exploring 21st century American culture through the use of 19th century wet plate photography, which we'll ask him to talk about when it's his turn to talk, including tintypes, ambrotypes, and glass negatives. Very excited to hear about that. And lastly, in addition to his photography, Bill makes music with the Jake Leg Stompers, the Hoodoo Men, the Jericho Roadshow, and the Worried Minds. So we're super excited for our panelists this evening, and I'm going to turn it over to Joon, who will guide the discussion between the rest of the photographers, and we will then have a Q&A. So every photographer is going to talk about their work. We'll move to a Q&A, so have your questions ready. Joon.
Hello. Thank you for all of that, Kashif. I'm Joon Powell.
I'm sorry, Joon. My apologies. I went out of order. I got so excited reading those bios. Actually, next up, we're going to have a video, and then Joon will ask you to come on. So I got ahead of myself there. Okay, Shatika, if you'll go ahead and show the video so that we can see all of the work that we'll be talking about in just a minute. All right. So now that everyone has gotten an overview of the work, we're going to turn it over to Joon and the photographers. So Joon, Dawn, John, and Bill will share a little bit about their work, and then we are going to move to a Q&A. And please have your questions ready. We anticipate a very spirited discussion. Joon.
Okay, so my name is Joon for anybody who's tuning in a little bit later. Joon Powell, and I curated this exhibit, which is up from now to the end of this month at Vanderbilt University's Divinity School Art Gallery on campus. But there are ways to view the gallery online if you're not able to get there in person, because I know that there are people viewing this who do not live in Tennessee. So this is a wonderful, wide conversation that we're having with a lot of different folks. And one of the things I'm most excited about is getting a lot of different kinds of people's eyes on these pictures. So I'll start off by saying how this project started. I'm a photojournalist. I've been taking pictures for 20 years. And when the pandemic began, it was no different. I continued taking pictures, but not so much of the community of Nashville, but of my own experience inside my home with my family. And as I built and built on those pictures, I thought, I'm sure I'm not the only person doing this. And I wanted to have something with some permanence, something tangible, something to connect my work with other people and other people's work with mine, and have other photographers to talk to about it and really get it out in the world. And so I pitched this group to each other, and we were all pretty excited to get on board and talk to other human beings about our work, I think. We had a show of the work at the Garrett Bennett Center last summer. But I'm really glad that we're doing this now, because I feel like the pictures have changed in meaning. We had thought at that time that that was the end of the pandemic, but it wasn't. Here we are. But I feel like now the photos have had time to marinate, to ruminate, to deepen their meaning. We kind of know a little bit more about where they stand in history, or don't. And I think we probably all we made some different choices in the past year about different photographs we would like to highlight for this body of work. See, so we're really glad to be here today, and my photographs just show my perspective of my isolation with my family, and how we spent our time and how we got through it. But my colleagues' pictures are also different. John is a traditional photojournalist. He's covering every community in Nashville and the entire human experience of the pandemic, which is so exciting. And Bill's photos are using these integrated processes that he will tell you lots more about. And Dawn's are wonderful, interesting pictures. They're all made with her cell phone. They're just colorful gems. And I'm really excited about them too. Let's see. Okay, so that's it for the moment. Shall I introduce Dawn? Okay, Dawn Majors. There's a lot to say about you. We met each other when when I was working at the Tennessee State Library and Archives. I can't believe it's been 10 years.
10 years, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. But we've all been taking pictures a long time, and I'm excited to hear more about what you have to say about your pictures.
Thanks a lot, Joon, for that great setup. I'll start out with me and my photographs. So as a photojournalist, I'm around people all day. I take pictures of people all day. I talk to people all day. I'm always in the public eye. And so for my pictures, I never would have considered them for a exhibit or show because they were just like little pieces of sanity for me. When I photograph with my cell phone, it's very personal. I photograph out of curiosity, just to see how something will look. And I feel like that keeps me sharp in my regular work because it always keeps me looking for something new. So it took Joon coming to all of us. I've known you guys. Does anybody want to participate in this? And I said, well, all I have are these, Joon. And and she was very receptive, and I'm grateful, and I'm excited that, you know, something that basically was a diary entry in my mind, never really meant to be seen by the public, has a life. I have my cell phone with me everywhere, and all through photo school, you know, the one refrain that you always hear is the best camera you have is the one that you have with you. And so it gives my back and shoulders a break from my everyday existence as a photographer, but it also brings a little bit of fun and, like I said, curiosity back into my creative process. So those are my photos, and I spent lockdown curating a number of these photos with Joon and trying to find a way to present them and have them work with this project. I too was on lockdown, but I also have a front-facing job, so I spent a lot of time out in the public eye. And it started the pandemic. That was very stressful because nobody knew what this was about or how you could get it, or you know, anything about it. So I just had to persevere. And so for me, you know, taking my little walks outside and having my camera with me and making photographs that didn't have anything to do with anyone else but me was kind of meditation for me throughout the whole pandemic. So,
well, I wanted to interject, if it's all right with you. When you sent me those photos, you sent me a Dropbox folder full of all these beautiful photos, and then I had dreams about them. That was so exciting and so fun to look through them. But there was, even though I know when you were taking them, you weren't thinking about the pandemic, but I saw all these just perfect pandemic themes of this sort of struggle between man and nature, and there was whimsy, you just cheered everybody up, but also just signs of pestilence and illness too, and it was right on. It was just ripe for this project. So.
Well, that's what I started. I mean, it really, you know, took you going through and us working together to make it work. And like, I'm forever grateful because, you know, these just get filed away on the old hard drive, and I keep making them, keep making more. So yeah, so that was pretty much the process for me.
I hope you'll keep it up.
Oh, yeah, I'm crazy. I need it.
There was a lot of artist therapy for me too. I'll say that. Let's see. Is it John? Here's next. See here.
It's me. I'm next. How you doing? Well, you know, I've been a photographer for a while and for years, and I'm a storyteller. All my work deals with people and how things are affected and how people are affected. And when this pandemic hit, we were just coming out of a devastating tornado that literally destroyed a big chunk of my neighborhood in East Nashville. The tornado flew right over my house. I heard it, actually went over, and I was out that night photographing and everything. And for a few days after that happened, there was all kinds of volunteers that were helping people. And then all of a sudden, the pandemic happened. And all of a sudden, nobody was helping anyone. Everybody was worried about what was going on and what was happening. And I was just sitting there going like, you know, I've got to there was a dangerous part of this, because nobody knew what was to happen. There were no vaccines. Every day I got out of my house and I covered, the neighborhoods and anything that was going on. My approach to this was to cover everything that was going on in the city and outside the city and just basic life. I had pandemic portraits in people's homes. I photographed like protests and people going to church, just everyday life, because I was really trying to show how this pandemic has really affected people and changed their lives. And so there was a lot of different stuff. Few political things I probably had in there. That was sort of, I guess, my own approach on it. But this was a historic time, and when things are happening, journalists always put themselves in. I've taken risks all my career. I was in Iraq 2 times covering the war for the Tennessean, and took incredible risks to get pictures. And I'm always looking for that moment that tells the story, that ultimate picture that just says it all. And I guess my approach to my work also is in a very Zen kind of way, because I don't try to think about stuff. I just try to react to what's going on in front of my camera. So that's kind of it. And I don't know what else to say. I sent Joon a whole bunch of photographs, probably too many, and she helped, because I really wanted her eye, a second eye on all this stuff, because I had so much material. I mean, I could just do a book on the pandemic alone, and she put up with me and looked at hundreds of photos, and we narrowed them down, and I really appreciate that, because I'm sure it was overwhelming.
It was a great year. It was a great year. I'm so glad that all these photographers got on board with this.
Cool.
Bill?
Am I up?
You're up.
There we go. Hey. Yeah, I'm thinking about this in terms of how I approached it. It's really just an extension of how I deal with photography in general. It's about my relationship to time. It's about what I love about photography is the limitation of choices. It is, you basically just have a frame that you're placing whatever you want to photograph in, and then making the exposure, either a long one or a short one. And that's really what it comes down to. I like this sort of limitation of choices. It kind of cuts down on the chatter and your ability to, you don't have time to second guess, unlike writing. I echo what John was saying about that. It's like, I just like to get in a situation and react. But I've been moving further and further from that and slowing the approach down and trying to really think about time itself. And what this process, what I decided to do all my work for this in a process that I've been working on for over a decade called a wet plate collodion. It was the second major type of photography that replaced daguerreotypes and calotypes, starting in 1851. And the advantage of it is that it allowed reproduction like a calotype, but it had the crispness of a daguerreotype. So it was kind of the best of both worlds. And most of what I've photographed for this trip has been on one of these. This is a piece of aluminum. And in the old days, it was a piece of was ferrotype, it was the actual name. Tintype was just kind of a nickname, piece of iron. And so what you do is you have collodion, put some stuff called collodion on here. I've got some around here somewhere. You did? Oh, and you pour it on the plate until it sets up, and then you put it in a tank of silver nitrate to sensitize it. And once it comes out of the silver nitrate, put it in a holder as such, and it has a place for the plate. The plate goes face down in the holder, closed up, and then that goes in the back of camera. This is a 120-year-old camera. This is actually the smallest of all the cameras that I use for wet plate. You replace the focusing screen with the holder, focus on the subject, lift off the cover for as few as 2 seconds. And I think the still life I did was about an 8-minute exposure. And then after that, you develop it and fix it, and you get an image on metal like this. Now, this one is an outtake that didn't make in the show, so you can get another reflection. This is park rangers at Mount Rushmore in South Dakota that we did a portrait of out there on a trip in October of 2020. But what I like about using this process for this particular project is, you know, the way that we all experience time during this time. I mean, it was kind of a great dichotomy. I mean, on one hand, time was interminably slow. The days went by like molasses. And then all of a sudden we looked up and like, wait a minute, it's already November. I thought it was March. And something about this process, it's such a slow process. It takes so much patience. It's about, you know, approaching time in a different way. And I think, and I called, you know, I think we call this the pandemic, like the great pause, where we've all had to slow down and reassess. And I thought this was the perfect kind of meditative process that spoke to the times where, you know, to be photographed, you have to often wait, you have to be still for, you know, 10 to 30 seconds. So, you know, the process itself is almost metaphor for our experience. And
if you don't mind my interjecting, I don't know if you can see questions in the chat, but there's one that's just right on for what you're saying. Could you say a little bit more about how time has changed what you see in the works? Like, do you see the pictures that you took last year in the same light now that it's been a year?
Oh, that's a really good question. I think all of us look at things a little differently than we did a year ago, because especially with the advent of, you know, the vaccine, we were like, okay, here we go. It's going to be over soon. We're going to get through this. And then that didn't happen. So, I mean, like looking back, it's still amazing looking at John's pictures of the Black Lives Matter protest and it's hard to believe that you could have had a massive outdoor physically gathering, you know, social justice protest movement in the middle of a pandemic. But here we are. And looking back on it, it almost, you know, we've moved on to war in Ukraine and all the other things. It's almost, it feels like history already, looking back. We get the sense that time is speeding up yet again, but not quite the way it was. I think a lot of us are obviously looking at our lives, looking at our relationship with time in new eyes. I mean, the great resignation shows that. It's not so much that people don't want to work, they just don't want to work under the same conditions they did before. There has been positive aspects of this and the great reassessment, you know, of course, at great personal and psychic and emotional cost. But I think all of us have a different relationship with time now. Does that answer the question from the chat?
It sure does. Thank you. That was perfect.
Well, I wonder if Shatika or Justine, if there are any more questions, either from coming in from Facebook, if you can just go ahead and drop those in or ask them.
No questions from Zoom.
Okay, well, Joon, I have another question for you. Because I think, you know, you chose to photograph your family, a lot of indoor scenes. I'm wondering if, just looking at if you would have chosen differently, if, let's say, if you had photographed, considering how the pandemic developed, right? First, we were locked down, and then we moved to being able to gather again with masks, you know, with six feet apart. And then things kind of locked down again a little bit. I mean, there was a period in there where we were able to take them off. So it was, it definitely fluctuated. Do you think that if you had photographed or started working maybe later in the pandemic that you would have chosen different scenes?
I think I would have just taken more pictures. Maybe not untaken others, but just taken more pictures. I want to be a parent who lives in the moment with my children and be present, but there's times where it's just too hard to put a camera to your face because there's something important happening. You want to be there for it. Like, my children had to go through the nasal swab testing and or like when our family would have these gatherings, that it had been such a long time since I saw my parents. I wish I'd taken more pictures of that. But I don't know, when you're photographing your own family, there's always this struggle. Like, am I going to do this creative thing which benefits me, or am I gonna just be here and be mom who's wearing all these different hats? So I think I would just take more pictures, but I also, one thing I didn't do enough of was document sort of my children's art that they made of the pandemic. I did some, but not enough. Like after my daughter got her first nasal swab, it was so scary and so terrible. She made a graphic novel about it, a little art therapy, and it really told the story of how it happened and how the doctor said he's very proud of her for being brave, and the car ride home with the lollipops. And I'd like to collect all those things up and scan them and have them, and they could be part of a book or an exhibit too.
Which makes absolute sense, since you are an archivist, and it's interesting to see the sense of responsibility that I'm getting from you to preserve materials and to preserve time.
Right. Yeah. So I would just do more. That's all. But I've been so glad to have this group, because we've been thinking, what can this be? What will this be? It really helped me make something tangible. So.
Yeah. Wow. Okay.
Does that answer your questions? I see more questions in the chat.
We have more wonderful questions coming in. Could you talk about how, and I guess this is for any of our photographers, could you talk about how you think the photographs will relate to how we remember this time?
I mean, I think photography is all about memory. The other photographers might, I'm sure they'll have their own responses too. But and there were pandemic collections being gathered throughout the pandemic by I know the State Library and Archives had one going, and Vanderbilt. And I was really glad to see people collecting history in real time as it's unfolding. It's not something that's just 100 years ago. And photojournalists are going to be naturally attuned to that, because we document history as it unfolds every day. There's Bill, what's someone say?
Oh no, I just about as far as the question goes of how photography relates to history. I mean, obviously it's hard to think about history, at least since 1839, without photography. But the thing is, in the past, a lot of us were shocked when we finally saw photographs from the 1930s in color. Because when the FSA, Farm Security Administration, Roy Stryker collected these phenomenal artists and sociologists and different folks to go out and document the world in America, especially the poverty and the need for the Roosevelt programs to build up, some support for the New Deal. And, because of the nature of photography at the time, it was all done in black and white. So it's when we look back at the Dust Bowl and the Depression, we think of the world was in black and white. And then we see color photographs that emerged in the last 10 years from that period. It is just shocking because it's, it doesn't comport to our idea of what history was like. Of course, the 30s were, everybody saw in black and white, right? And what's so great about now, in this time period, there's so many frustrating things about it. But one of the great things is the empowerment of everyday people to record everything around. And so we're going to have a document of this time through the eyes of professionals, through documentary photographers, but also through cell phone photos of people as they've lived it in a variety of media. And we're going to have a much richer understanding of the full picture of this history, taken from the perspective. For once, this is the first time in history that the people who were not empowered with media access and camera access, their stories didn't get told from their point of view. And now that's changed. The power has gone to the everyday person to tell their own story. And I think that's how we're going to look back at this time period, through a much more complex eye than we have in the past.
Yeah, I agree with Bill, what he's saying. I mean, I read an interesting thing. It said that there were more pictures taken in one day with all the iPhones and everybody's cameras, and more in one day than the entire 1982. All the photographs that were taken in 1982 there's more photographs taken in one day than that whole year. The way stuff goes now. So it's really, it just blows my mind. I just can't, I mean, I shoot a lot, but my God, that's a lot of photos, right? So it's just fascinating. I don't have the word. It's been, I've been trying to capture for years, and I do this. I want to capture the human condition and reality of what's going on, and without interfering myself. So I'm not posing things. I'm trying to just capture moments and things that tell a story, and so that's sort of what I was going for out there when I was working. I love black and white. And by the way, my work is on metal. Matte metal with archival ink, and I chose that sort of way to do it instead of just a normal photographic paper. I just like the way the metal looks, and it's just kind of a cool process. But yeah, that's sort of was my approach on this. So I hope that answered somebody's question. I don't know.
Dawn, you're muted.
Okay, I was looking at the black and white question. I think it's the one we're on now, because Bill and Joon answered the history question so eloquently, and I can't add anything to that. And for me, as far as like what I shoot in, because my medium is my cell phone, I shoot things that I think are interesting, and some things are colorful out the gate and some things aren't. But I like to go in and do some post work and experiment with what the image could look like. So for me, it's just an investigation. That's when I decide to shoot something or do something in color or black and white, because the cell phone gives you so much leeway to do whatever. I mean, in mere seconds, I can decide, ooh, this looks better in black and white, or ooh, this looks better in color or slightly more saturated, like right on my phone in my hand. So that's how I make my decisions. Is I see something I think is interesting, but then I wonder if it could be even more interesting. So that's how.
I'm sorry. I just wanted to add one thing. I chose to shoot in black and white because so much of my work is in color, and I really wanted to do a different, working for newspapers and stuff. That's mostly what you shoot in, and I wanted to try something different, just a different approach on it. So.
Is that Lucille saying hi?
Yeah, she's barking. She's 17 years old, and she's howling at me. Out there. You hear her? Sorry. But come out, Daddy.
I can speak a little bit to the black and white versus color question. I'm most of my work during the pandemic was just a digital SLR, so it's shot in color. There's a few cell phone pictures, but I often decide if I'm going to grayscale it, make it black and white after the fact. And that's usually based on the light. I feel like if it's a black and white picture and there's amazing light on something, then you'll notice that more if it's in black and white. And if it's in color, it should be in color for a reason. And a lot of photographers, I think, might think of it the other way around. You should use black and white for a reason. But I feel like color is a tool and you should use it for a reason. That's my take on that.
My answer to that is very simple in that of the four of us, I'm the only one shooting in a process that is not color. So it's just a function of the medium. Now it does have color. It's not, when you think of black and white, the wet plate process does have color, but it's a monochromatic color for the most part. It's a slightly greenish cast, bluish cast, or warm cast. And getting back to the idea of nostalgia, it's so funny when you want to do a photograph to make it look nostalgic, you always put it in sepia colors, and that's because well, that was just a function of the print process in the 19th century. It just so happened to be that color. I mean, if everything would have been purple or green, then that would have been the color of nostalgia. It just so happened to be the chemical process was that color. So, but I
Do
think
you ever play around intentionally with like collodion or ambrotype or something like that just for the color?
Oh, well, I will have to admit, before I started doing the actual tintypes and stuff with all the texture and everything else, I would just take regular color photographs, convert them to black and white, and literally steal Photoshop edges off old photographs and drop them in Photoshop and paint them to make them look like they were old, because I just I wanted to look like that. And then then I finally was like, okay, I got better put in the time and work investment to actually do the real thing. So yeah, of course. I mean, they say that Southern photographers, Southern artists trafficking, what was it, Sally Mann said, trafficking enough romanticism to destroy the careers of any other artist. So I mean, yeah, I'm of course that's a bad paraphrase, but yeah, I'm of course I'm a hopeless romanticist. I'm from the South.
Well, we're so glad.
I was, really a camera for me, and think about it. If we're talking about memories and time, I mean, the camera's a time machine. It captures a moment. That moment stays like that forever, and you capture somebody's youth or children or whatever, that's there forever. And it's I always look at it that way, like it's a time capsule that you've stolen some time and held it back, so.
I think we have one more question here. Do the other photographers, I think, Joon, you answered this, but do the other photographers feel that there were moments that they missed?
There are always moments that you're going to miss, but the beauty of a missed moment is that there's always another one.
Very well. Yeah, you miss things. You can, that's why I carry a camera everywhere I go, because I hate missing moments. I want to pick up, everywhere I go, I have one. And yeah, you miss them sometimes, but what Dawn said, there's always another moment that comes along. So.
Well, yeah, I've probably taken 1 million photographs in my life, but I've seen at least 15 million of all the, and I often remember the ones that I didn't get more so than the ones that I did get. But you have to come to peace with this. And I decided a long time ago, when I switched from 35 millimeter, which is easier to capture, almost every fleeting moment. You can you can become too obsessive, as like our Johnny, my friends, William Albert Allard once says, it's like if you're going to go bird hunting, you don't shoot into the whole flock. You pick a bird and you track it and you just try to get the one bird. And that's the way photography really is. And then, but the more that you go with larger formats and older processes, then you just, like with me, when I switched to the Hasselblad, I can get maybe 10% of the photos I could have with a 35, but the ones you get are technically, beautiful. And then now that I've moved to the wet plate process, yeah, it's not a matter of missing moments. You have to basically collaborate with the other person to create a moment. So it's any degree of photography is bargaining with, missing what, coming short of what your ultimate goal is. And that, your vision for what your art is and what you actually do, the gap between which that fails, that is your art. And that's okay. I mean, that is what you create. And that's in all endeavors,
Oh, that is so incredible. I thank all of you for those succinct and thought-provoking answers, really not only on photography, but also on life. So thank you all. And at this time, we are going to, this is the end of our first panel. We are going to take a brief break. And then at 6 p.m. sharp, we'll begin our second panel with Ellen Armour, Joon Powell, the lovely Joon Powell again, and Lucy Kalasova. All right, we'll see you at 6 p.m. Please stay logged in and we'll be right back. All right, at this time, I hope that everyone has rejoined us, and we're going to go ahead and get started with our second panel. We're so excited to have with us this evening Dean Ellen Armour and Lucy Kalasova. Dean Armour is, and Lucy and Joon are going to talk about larger themes of photography, spirituality, and health disparities. So, of course, you've already been introduced to Joon, but I'm going to go ahead and introduce Dean Armour, who is E. Rhodes and Leona B. Carpenter Chair in Religion, Gender, and Sexuality, and Associate Dean for Academic Affairs, Associate Professor of Feminist Theology, Director of the Carpenter Program in Religion, Gender, and Sexuality. And she holds, as I mentioned before, the E. Rhodes and Leona B. Carpenter Chair in Feminist Theology. Her research interests are in feminist theology, in theories of race, gender, disability and embodiment, and visual culture, as well as contemporary continental philosophy. She's the author of Deconstruction, Feminist Theology and the Problem of Difference, Subverting Race and Gender, co-editor of Bodily Citations, and also her latest book, well, she has another one coming out, she shared with us earlier, but you also should check out Signs and Wonders, Theology After Modernity, which uses photographs to diagnose and respond to our relationship to modernity. So very relevant to our discussion today. And she'll tell you about her current project in just a minute. Also, we're so excited to have Lucy Kalasova, who holds a PhD in sociology and health services. And she is assistant professor of medicine, health, and society here at Vanderbilt University, and also assistant professor of sociology. She studies the links between the distribution of socioeconomic resources and the health of populations. And she also investigates the origins and persistence of population health disparities in middle to high income countries. So very relevant again to the pandemic and what we're talking about today. In other related lines of inquiry, she has studied how and to what extent material hardship mediates the path between economic cycles and individual health. Her research has appeared in the Journal of Health and Social Behavior, Social Science and Medicine, the Annual Review of Sociology, and Population Research and Policy Review, and other prestigious outlets. So we're so excited to have our panelists with us here today. My first question is for Joon. So Joon, I'm wondering, if we want to talk about the photographer as a type of observer, right? Both of daily life and also the more artistic echoes of daily life. And by that, I'm talking about fashion photography and, things like that. Then perhaps the end result, what we get is a type of memory. Could you talk about the power and duty of the photographer to widen the scope of what is remembered nationally?
That's a great question, Kashif. I've long thought that photography just is the practice of being observant. You can even think about the mental pictures you have throughout your life. And if you were to make those into something you could hold in your hand, maybe that's the practice of being a photographer. But the duty of a photographer is, to the more traditional photojournalist, I would say, is to be the eyes and ears of a community, and ask the stories, what stories are not being told, that I can tell. There's a lot of debate in the journalism world about giving voice to the voiceless, which is not the way that I see things. I just want to document the stories that aren't being told. But I think that I think some of my other photographers could help answer this question too.
Yeah,
if that's all right.
absolutely. Happy for them to chip in as well. Yeah.
I think that basically, so a photojournalist's duty, I would say, is to be the eyes and ears of a community, whatever it is that you have access to. Um, and then, but a documentary photographer or an artist photographer, it is to show a perspective. And as more and more people have cameras and we have a more and more connected world, you will see every perspective through a lens, which I really appreciate about this group. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. Bill, Dawn, John.
Well, it's this is a debate that goes back for the birth of image making about representation and true documentation, and is there a bias, and I've thought a lot about this, especially when if you're a documentary photographer and you're working in the community, by definition you're going to be documenting other people that don't share the same life experiences as you. And there's no way that you're going to give them voice in the way that they would give themselves voice. But I think as long as you're honest and cognizant of that fact, and I think the most important thing, especially for a journalist or a documentary photographer, is it's not that you have to have the voice of the other person. As long as you're honest about your voice and where you're coming from, then, and consistent in that, I think then someone can look at your work, assessing what your experience is, what you're saying, what your consistency is, your honesty, your attempts to do the right thing, and then extrapolate from that how it applies to the subject matter. Because there's no such thing as objectivity. I mean, the fact of taking something that's happening, unfolding in real time in 3 dimensions and reducing it to a 2-dimensional, flat surface, it's deeply reductive. So, as long as you're honest about that, I think therein lies the responsibility. I mean, you can't be all things at all times, and you really shouldn't even try. You should just be honest with yourself, honest with your approach, honest with your own sincerity, even if there's an artifice in that. In other words, there's a lot of people that really, the Cindy Shermans of the world, she isn't a documentary photographer, but she documented a time through her vision of herself as a woman in all of those various roles in that time period. And it's, in some ways that's a more cogent document of that time period than newspaper pictures of the day. So, but you know where she's coming from. So I think that's the real responsibility, is to be honest with yourself and your approach.
Yeah, and I think asking the question often, what is missing?
Yeah.
What is missing from the conversation?
That's so powerful. Dawn, John, anything?
Oh, John, you're muted. Dawn, you're muted too.
There we go.
Yeah, I'll
Go ahead, Dawn.
I'll let you go, John. You sure?
Go ahead. I'll go after you.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, okay, repeat the question one more time. Sorry.
So we're talking about the role of the power and duty of the photographer to widen the scope of what's remembered nationally. So the sort of the role of the photographer in society.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I came along in photography at a time where there were 1 or 2 of people who looked like me that were taking pictures on a professional level. And I appreciate all those mentors and people who kind of welcomed me into the fold and was like, you can be a storyteller, you can do this too, because it wasn't something that I would necessarily see on a daily basis. I knew I could be a teacher or a doctor or a lawyer, all of those things, but never did I imagine that I would be a storyteller. So I feel like that widens the scope in itself when you have other photographers that are encouraging to just anyone who wants to be a part of this community and tell stories and make their own pictures. But to speak to what Bill said is the honesty. I mean, I had a quote about being a beautiful liar and a seductress, but in some ways it really is, because a lot of times when you approach people cold and they think their lives are boring and there's nothing to see, and then me as the photographer and storyteller see so much potential in who they are and want to put that story out there for everyone to see, so that they can see a version of themselves that they don't see. And for me, that's the great reward, is to see the beauty in something or someone, and then help them, not only them, see it too. So I like to reflect the person back to themselves. And I see that as a great honor and responsibility in putting diverse, well, I hate the term diverse, just putting stories out there that, you know, as Joon would say, what's missing? We need to see this.
That's so powerful. I really appreciate that. John, anything to add to that before we move to the next question?
There we go. I would like to just, you know, in journalism school, I went to art school too, but journalism school, you know, you're always told, everyone's always told you have to be objective to be a photographer. I was raised on an Indian reservation. The way I grew up was totally different than most people I meet. So I've struggled with this, trying to be fair and objective. And I came to find out that you can't be objective. All you can do is be fair. That's what I do as a journalist. I try to look at both sides equally. I want to get the story from both sides. And that's all I can do is document that. And then, you know, and try not to have an opinion, but just try to be fair, because it's impossible to be objective. The way you grew up, the way I grew up, the way other people grew up are we have biases, and we have, you know, some of us grew up in poverty, some of us grew up in wealth. You know, it's just, you can drive yourself nuts trying to be objective. But I think that the thing is, be fair. And I think as a journalist, that's what we have to do.
Solid, really solid. I so appreciate that from all of you folks. I'll also like to remind our attendees, if you do have any questions, we are going to also have a Q&A after this. So please feel free to drop your questions in the chat or send them in via Facebook. So Ellen, Dean Armour, my question to you, I would like to pivot at this time from considering the photographer to thinking about the ways in which we engage with the photograph, right? So what are the ways in which the photograph, which we often think of as a very final and static medium, essentially maybe observes us? And what I mean by that is that photographs can call up our social anxieties, fears, and desires, which you write about in Signs and Wonders. Also, is there a way in which we prefer photographs so that we can maybe gaze without being gazed at? I wonder about that too.
It's a great question, Kashif, and thanks to all of the panelists too, who've spoken so far, because it's such a rich conversation already about it from the side of photography, and particularly this last question that we've been discussing. You know, I think one of the great things in doing research in a new field is you get exposed to all these different scholars, and you find these kind of interesting overlaps between things that you have worked on and, you know, and other stuff. And one of the, I think it's W.J.T. Mitchell, who has a book called What Do Pictures Want? And he's actually using uses the kind of religious metaphor of animism, or practice of animism, to talk about photographs as, in a certain sense, having, I don't know, agency might be a little bit strong, but, you know, but photographs demand something from us. You know, they ask us to look, and they ask us, and it's particularly true of iconic photographs. Some of the iconic photographs that I can name, if I, like, for example, one of our photographers mentioned the Works Progress Administration, and it's just incredible pool of talented photographers who took photographs to promote the New Deal. One of those is quite an iconic photograph that anybody would recognize, called Migrant Mother. I probably can just tell you the title and you know what it looks like, right?
Yeah.
And another is a photograph from the Vietnam War called Napalm Girl. Again, I can just say the title and you know what photograph I'm talking about, right? And those kind of photographs just have this compelling, you know, they compel us to look, and they demand a response from us of some sort. So like in my own work, I distinguish between, and following scholars, you know, I'm not making this up, between what photographs index, what I call their that, then, there. So, you know, the specific, you know, here's this woman in the middle of a desert somewhere, it looks like, holding her babies and looking just bedraggled and poor. Or here's this little girl running through Vietnam, you know, with her arms out naked because of napalm. That's photographic. That's one thing we need to pay attention to with the photographs. But on the other hand, it's also about photographic affectivity, how photographs move us, both emotionally and to take action. And if we think about both of those aspects, they're really kind of inseparable from one another. And any photograph has the capacity to demand an emotional response, right? And sometimes ask us to do something. Think about the role of photography in the Black Lives Matter movement, and the role of video photography in particular, right? The videos of Ahmaud Arbery and the video particularly of George Floyd being kneeled on for 10 seconds almost. So that kind of power is really endemic to photography. So I think what's incumbent upon us is to be more thoughtful about how we engage photography, because another thing that's true of photographs is they don't move all of us in the same way. One of the photographs that I talk about, for example, in my new book is the photograph of Trayvon Martin, which was not taken at the scene. So it's not so much that then, there of Trayvon wearing a gray hoodie. This is a selfie, right? Not taken at the scene, but it captures an iconic look, and people respond to that photograph differently. It was a huge spark to the Black Lives Matter movement, but it also prompted Dylan Roof to kill 10 people in the massacre at Mother Emanuel Church. So we need to kind of really wrestle with how we see, because how we see and how we respond to photographs is definitely going to be shaped by how we've been formed to see. So the social formation of seeing is definitely going to be shaped by all the isms that are out there that are a part of our world. And yet I think photographs in particular offer us an opportunity to, in part because of what you say at the end, it's kind of like, okay, here's a photograph. It's presenting itself to you. It may be demanding something of you, but it's not gonna, shoot you if you don't do what it's demanding, right? So you have the opportunity then to really wrestle with a photograph if you take that opportunity and think about how it's moving you. And this is one of the places where I think religious ways of seeing can be particularly helpful to us, believe it or not. Whether we're religious or not, that's not an issue so much. And here I turn to the work of another scholar, David Morgan, who describes what he calls 8 religious gazes. But those gazes, even though he sees them as, identifies them from religious ways of looking, they rest on ordinary embodied ways of seeing. And that's another thing. We've got to think about seeing in a more complex way. It's not just, the biological impact of light on our eyes, right? Or the physics of that impact of light on our eyes, but it's a fully embodied affective practice. And those ways of seeing that Morgan identifies, I think are just ordinary ways of seeing and based on ordinary ways of seeing. I did an experiment with my students in a class when I taught a class on theology, visual culture, and photography recently, where we looked at the photographs of Trayvon Martin and the photograph. You may remember the photograph Dylan Roof posted of himself holding a Confederate flag and a gun. that's kind of anchored his manifesto. You can't find that photograph online, I don't think anymore, but it was very powerful. And I had my students look at each one of those and identify which, and then read the list of gazes and identify which gaze they thought they were using. And then they all could identify the gaze they thought they were using. And then I asked them to select one of the other gazes or a gaze and use it deliberately to look at the photograph and see what happened. And in both cases, you can find this, adopting a particular gaze. I should say first, the kinds of gazes that they adopted originally ran the gamut. What was one that was interesting is what's called the aversive gaze, where you look around the object rather than at it. And several of them said, that's exactly what I did, because I couldn't stand to look at Dylan Roof. I didn't want to look at that. But then if they engaged him through the communal gaze, which required, or no, the liminal gaze, where you kind of look back to see, okay, here's the edges of me and here's the edges of you. It changed. It became a conversation where, and one of the students, in fact, had this imaginary conversation with Roof where, they, just tried to get a handle on how someone could do what they did, what he did. So those are just some examples of, I think guess what I would say is the fluidity and the variety with which we look, the fluidity and the variety of the ways we look. And one of the dangers, I think, of our visually saturated world, one of the photographers mentioned that, we've taken more pictures were taken in one day in the entire year of 1982, right? And particularly the way we access photos now, flipping through them on our phone, is that we don't take the time to look. We just, we get that jolt, that bit of dopamine, and then we move on. But if we actually do pay attention to the photos that really capture our attention, that as W.J.T. Mitchell said, they want something of us, and really take the time to engage them and look at them. And it's one thing that art photographs do, and that photojournalists do, I think, is provide us with photographs that capture our attention in particular powerful ways. If we really take the time, we can, perhaps learn to see differently. And we have examples of that too, of people. Think about, for example, the photograph of Alan Kurdi, the little Syrian boy washed up on that Turkish beach, for example, how it moved so many people particularly in Europe, to open their hearts and homes and wallets to Syrian refugees, right? So these are just examples of the power of the photograph, I think, that we often take for granted, but really could change the world, and has, Migrant Mother and Napalm Girl. Both of those were very effective in changing people's hearts and minds.
I think that's so powerful. You made me think also, I love that point. We're so saturated. I think of being on Instagram.
Yeah.
Photo. You don't know where to look anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing means anything.
Mm-hmm.
They do mean things, but it's just, it is so associated with capitalism. Everybody's trying to sell something. And I think perhaps the role of a photojournalist today is to capture, as you said, something that is so powerful that it cuts through, and that it does demand something from you, because, and it is really cutting through the many voices, because there are so many today. I could think I could get lost for an hour just scrolling through Instagram or TikTok, or, someone is asking a question, which I was going to also ask, which is great. Joon was asking, can we see the 8 gazes? or what they all are if you have them before you. But we can also drop them in the chat, give you a moment to search for them when I ask the next question too.
Yeah, let's see. If you want to share the screen, whoever's in charge, I
Or
don't
if
remember.
you do you happen to have a link that you
But
could drop in the chat?
Let's see. There's not a link to the gazes, but I have.
Or if you can just tell us what they are.
Wait, I can do that, but hang on one second. I might be able to just send you an image of it. Give me a
Sure.
sec.
Okay.
But yeah, I can definitely tell you what they are.
Okay. Yeah. Just because I think we might not be able to do the sharing of the screen so quickly.
That's fine. That's
But in
fine.
the meantime, while you're doing that,
Yeah.
the idea about the gazes also I think is so powerful, because I was thinking about this exercise that we did at the Racial Justice Institute a couple of years back, the long look of love, and you had to gaze at someone for 2 minutes or so, and you began to see something different. And I'm thinking about your student. Thank you. Oh, great. I'm thinking about your student who gazed at the photograph or the picture of Dylan Roof to try to see something different, using a gaze. And I think that's just a powerful experience. Okay,
Yeah.
so here are our gazes. So if you can go through them for us, that would be so wonderful.
Yeah. I will go through it for you. So, and I'll give you a little bit more information about them, just very brief. So the devotional gaze is when you voluntarily submit yourself to the visual object. That's the most obviously religious one, right? The reciprocal gaze is one that prompts a transformative exchange between the seer and the seen. So between you and the photograph you're looking at. The aversive gaze is when you look around the visual object rather than directly at it, right? And sometimes, I do that all the time. I'm very sensitive about these things. The communal gaze invites you to, when you become aware of the influence of social settings on how you see. And the liminal gaze is one that marks the edge of us and the beginning of them, right? Think about us in quotation marks and them in quotation marks. So, what does it mean for a white person to look at Trayvon Martin, for example, at the photograph of Trayvon Martin? What does it prompt in them versus what it might prompt in, say, Trayvon's mother or father? The virtual gaze is one where you participate, you kind of project yourself into the scene in a certain sense through a kind of vicarious participation, and you project yourself into unfamiliar ways of being. So imagine yourself walking down the street in Sanford, Florida, wearing Trayvon Martin's hoodie, right? Think about Obama saying, that could have been my son or could have been me, right? But that's not an unfamiliar way of being, that's a familiar way of being. What if one of my students, in fact, did that, imagined herself walking down the street in Sanford with a gray hoodie, and, it's like, nobody would mess with me, So it's very important to do that. And then finally, the unilateral gaze renders one, quote, powerless and subject to the manipulative, overwhelming, objectifying gaze of authority. And in a certain sense, think about Dylan Roof's photograph as a kind of attempt to do that. Here I'm sitting here with this Confederate flag and a gun, and I'm this white guy, and I'm just staring right at you, and I'm telling you, this is the way it is. This is who you need to follow. His goal was to start a race revolution, and that's what he's trying to do. And then the last one is the occlusive gaze, where you put up another visual object as a shield, or you close your eyes to avoid someone else's judgmental gaze, right? And so for some of the students looking at either photo felt like, you needed to, especially for a white student, to close their eyes to avoid looking at or being looked at, in a sense, by either Trayvon, because it's a judgment. What are you going to do to stop this from happening again? Or Dylan, this is what I'm telling you, you need to do, and I'm not participating in it. So those are the gazes that Morgan talks about, and that's kind of how they work. Is that helpful?
That is extremely helpful, and I'm sure that
Yeah.
everyone was tuned in and on the edge of their seats like me, because I'm looking at this and going, these are also present in life, in daily
Oh,
life,
yeah.
I think.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
there's a way in which when we talk about the aversive gaze,
Mhm.
seeing around something, I mean, this is the theme of, let's say, Ralph Waldo Ellison's Invisible Man. You're in
Yes.
the society, but people are
Yes.
looking around you.
Yes.
And so when we talk about invisibility, hypervisibility, it's
Yeah.
all related to the gaze.
Yes.
So
Yes.
this is very powerful, and I thank you so much for sharing this with us.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so we're if you
Let me
stop,
unshare my screen.
yeah, if you
Yeah.
unshare, and thank you so much for that. I'm glad everybody got to see it and get it etched into their memory.
Yeah.
Someone says they want to audit your class. I do too. Thank you for giving us a little, a little sliver tonight.
Mhm.
So my next question is for Lucy Kalasova at this time. And Lucy, I am wondering, thank you for waiting so patiently. I want to move to talk about health disparities during the pandemic. We all know the stats. We've heard them about how COVID-19 disproportionately affected those already experiencing social inequality. And you'll phrase that in a way that is far more scholarly, and I look forward to that. But can you talk about the way in which social inequality leads to negative health behaviors, like, let's say, non-compliance with medication, and how that was weaponized against those communities during the pandemic? And then also, can you talk about the ways in which sociologists and photographers, or ethnographers and photographers, can partner to reduce health disparities? Is there a way?
Sure, thank you. Thank you for those great questions. And I would also like to audit Professor Armour's class if she'll have me. So one of the ways we should be thinking about social inequality is as a tool for restricting our freedoms. So some people live under conditions of much greater unfreedom than other people, and it limits the ways in which we are able to exercise our agency. And I think we all are aware to some extent of the changing narrative about personal responsibility in relation to the pandemic over time. So early on, we heard a lot of "we're all in this together," right? This was like that was the refrain of the first year. And in the later stages, as vaccines became more available, as we became more aware of the transmission mechanisms, it was more about, are you doing your part? Why are you not doing your part? What is wrong with you as a person for not doing your part? And why do you not care about those around you? And those types of much more individually focused narratives can be weaponized, as you framed it, to in a way blame the victims, right? Blame the people who already live in the conditions of much greater unfreedom, and ascribe them the responsibility, the guilt for the disease that's disproportionately affecting them. So we can, for example, think about people who are working in less secure jobs, people who don't have paid leave or adequate health insurance. These workers are much less likely to make what we would consider healthy choices because the set of options that they have for taking care of their health are restricted. They may come to work even when they're not feeling 100% because they're worried about losing their jobs. They're worried about putting food on the table. So this, of course, getting COVID and infecting somebody else with COVID is bad for you, bad for your health, but so is not having a job, so is not eating. And so the sets of choices that we are, we need to be viewing decisions that people make about their health as kind of weighted by the available choices. And the very word choice is one that's been used by public health professionals so often, I think implies a straightforward decision between being healthy and being unhealthy, as in you are choosing to be an unhealthy person. But of course, we know that health is something that becomes produced over the life course, much more so by our circumstances than by our immediate choices that we are making about coming to work when we're not feeling entirely healthy versus not. And related to that, we have also all become familiar with this term of pre-existing condition, right? Everybody knows about pre-existing conditions. And much before the pandemic, we knew that the US population is extremely unequal in terms of health. And some of it has to do with unequal access to healthcare, and a lot of our media focuses on the unequal access to healthcare. But as sociologists and social scientists, we know that a greater deal of this inequality can be accounted for by the radically different conditions of life that we find ourselves in. And stress plays an important role in these life conditions. People spend their lives in environments that have vastly different levels of resources. So some people feel safe walking down the street, some people don't feel safe walking down the street. Some people have a reliable mode of transportation, others have to walk a mile to the nearest bus stop, and the bus is late, and then they're late for work, entirely due to circumstances outside of their control. We know that experiencing stress and living in neighborhoods that are not safe, not serviced, is associated with much poorer health behaviors, with the development of the so-called pre-existing conditions. And so there is just such an overwhelming evidence about what makes populations and individuals healthy and unhealthy that we have had for decades. It's just happened to be the case that the pandemic shone the light on the inequities that have been extremely well documented for a long time. And in a way, these types of inequities are now much more, to use a term that's been used before here, in the public eye, because some of them were invisible. We live in very segregated, economically and racially separate spaces in the United States. And so it can be easy for some people to close their eyes and not see the hardship, the disparities that other people are experiencing. I think the pandemic has made this a bit harder. As far as your second question about the ways in which we can collaborate, I have never previously worked with photographers. This clearly was a mistake, as I learned on today's panel. There's so much to learn. And I see a great potential in bridging these two worlds. Many sociologists work on projects that in some way parallel those that photographers are undertaking. And by those projects, I mean the projects that intend to provide social commentary. Of course, not every type of photography intends to do that, but for those who do, I think there are clear relationships. And I see photographers from my very lay uneducated perspective as masters of framing. And the sociologists are the people who want to see what's outside of the frame. And they want to understand the relationship of the social facts outside of the frame to what is happening on the inside, to what is being captured. And so I think that this relates to the conversation we've had a moment ago about what's being left out. And I think that sociologists and photographers could work together very productively to expand the frame beyond the visible.
That's good. I'm going to get that on a t-shirt. That is amazing. Thank you, Lucy. Wow. Framing, I mean, Justine dropped a comment in here, framing inside versus outside and widening the scope. I love that. That is really good. Do any of our photographers want to chip in with anything else, or with a response to that?
I would like to maybe ask the question just in general
Yeah.
to who are the audiences that need to see this work that aren't? Or is there a group that we really should have focused on and didn't? Maybe we should have pictures of people who who are vaccine hesitant or didn't want to wear a mask, or I think there's certainly pictures of people who had to live their life and couldn't be in a box for 2 years, so that's my question. Who needs to see this? How could we get these photos in front of their eyes?
That's a wonderful question. Any of our panelists, any of our other panelists, would you like to chip in and answer that? I think that's a great question.
I'll take a stab at it. I mean, I think anybody and everybody needs to see them. And I think, I kind of go back to the, I guess, to some reflections that you all gave when you were talking about your own work. I mean, Joon, I think about you saying, I was kind of locked down. I took the pictures of my family, and I think these family photos that you have are so relatable, because you capture, it's not, I mean, yeah, you're documenting in a certain sense, but again, if you think about how those photographs move us, like the one where one of your daughters has their hand in their head, and probably your husband's hand, I'm guessing, but I don't know, that just captures so well the kind of exhaustion that we all felt. And I think looking at those photographs all the way through, kind of thinking about the creativity of children, and just what is it going to be like for our children whose formative years, not that they're at the end of them, but what is it going to be like for them when they grow up? This is going to impact them in huge ways. And then I think too, Dawn, about the photographs that are part of your contribution to the exhibit. They just are these. So many of them to me were these notes of hope in the middle of, utter abject misery. And we need that message of hope as much as we need anything else. And in part, they're messages of hope because they remind us of other things that are part of our everyday experience. The blue butterfly, the bright blue butterfly. I mean, I was like, how did she get that picture? That's the main thing I wanted to know. But that, and what it looked, hearing you talk now about how you work with color made me think, I wonder if this is one where she augmented the background in particular. That message of hope is just so huge. And I forget, John or Bill, one of you talked about, maybe both of you, maybe Bill in particular, you talked about, there's no such thing as objectivity in photography and in journalism, photojournalism. What I can do is, be fair. And that's all I can do. And all of you mentioned something about that in relationship to photojournalism too. So I think, like, it's not a matter of, Joon, I think this is your words, it's not a matter of giving voice to the voiceless, but it's a matter of documenting what's out there and what you see. And it's important to have people who see from different perspectives out there doing that. And all of you spoke to how you bring your own particular perspectives to the work of photography. And that's going to help capture things. I mean, yeah, it'd be great to have a photo of somebody who's vaccine hesitant. It'd be great to have photos of the protests against mask mandates and photographs, but there are plenty of those. Photojournalists did that work too. There are photographs of that horrible school board meeting in Franklin where all these parents were just like, being furious about stuff. It's out there. But what I think is different about your work is you're crossing that invisible line between photojournalism and art photography. And it's the photos that are at that line, I think, that really powerfully have the possibility of stretching us and moving us, And some of that's technology. Bill, using that old colloidal, method is just hugely impactful, I think. Some of it's technology, Dawn, in terms of what you do with the cell phone camera. I would never have guessed that was a cell phone camera. Lord knows none of my pictures look like that. So, but just showing us what can be done with that. And then making sure that you are shooting what's out there in front of you, to go back to Lucy's point. Yeah, what's in the frame and what's outside the frame, to make sure that we see things we wouldn't otherwise see. And all of you are doing that. All of you are doing that. And that's just so, that's the power of photography. That's the power of photography right there. Right there.
I think that's incredible. Any other of our panelists, would you like to build on that? Okay, well,
I was just gonna say that's so much information that I'm just trying to process how I would even build on top of that, because there is something there. It's just that was a lot of fascinating information that I'd never heard and related my photography to. So yeah, I'm still thinking, but yeah.
I'm a big believer. Everybody has their own vision. You could line all of us up with the same subject in front of us, and I bet you that everyone would have a different picture, the way they see. I did that with some students I had when I was teaching a photography a couple of years ago, and I lined everybody up and told them to take a picture of something. Every one of them had a different picture of what was right in front of us, and that's why you really have to trust your own vision. Your own vision is so important. Any person that you talk to that is famous or whatever, they always say, throw out the book and just rely on your vision. And I think a lot of photographers make that mistake. There's a whole bunch of little Ansel Adamses running around. There's all this kind of stuff. And if they would just trust just say, this is the way I want it to look. That's the whole thing. That's what I try to do. And that's what I always tried to tell people to do, is just follow your own book. Throw the other books away.
Yeah, and I think that speaks back to the title of the exhibit, A Pandemic Observed. You're an observer, and that speaks back to my first question, that you bring this is what we've been talking about tonight. You bring yourself to the camera and to the picture, and so it's going to be what you observed and your perspective. And acknowledging all of that, I think, is a very beautiful thing and an important thing. And I love what you said, trust your vision. That's really important. Yeah.
And I think it's important to continually look at that and assess it. I mean, the thing is, one of the great things about especially documentary photography is that for those of us who have a tendency to get into a downward spiral of self-doubt and overthinking things and all that, I think one of the reasons I became a photographer instead of a writer, because I love to write and I love to think about things, is because you have to cut to the chase very quickly. You do not have any choice. If you're going to document real events in real time, you have to just kind of dance with reality as it's happening and unfolding in front of you. You can't rethink it. You have to just react. But that said, as time goes on, my own assessment of my own work, past, present, and forward, is informed by how that is received, and we know now more about how people receive that work. And obviously, a lot of us would maybe have changed our approach in the past when we were trying to figure things out or had a different perspective. But that's I think that's really important to keep looking at constantly, being consciously aware, because everybody's evolving. Everybody is looking at images in different ways now. We have totally different ways of understanding images than we did 100 years ago. And I think that's incumbent upon photographers, especially documentary photographers, to try to remain honest and try to remain true to that. And you have to do it every single day. And you're sometimes going to fail, often going to fail. But I think the attempt to stay honest is what brings authenticity to the work.
All right, Dawn, I will let you make a comment, and then we have one more comment that y'all might want to talk about.
I just think that a lot of it has already been said, so I'll let it. We'll just move on.
Well, maybe you want to comment, Dawn, on this last comment here, which was one of the challenges with the pandemic has been that we haven't had many pictures of what the inside of our hospitals have looked like. Do y'all think that's true? Do you think that's true, Dawn? And if so, does that seem like a loss to you?
It depends on where you get your media. I mean, as a member of the journalism community, past and present, in essence, I saw a lot of it. I talked to former colleagues and friends going into these situations, and we discussed their concerns and, how they felt about, their experiences during the pandemic. And I just think that there are so many restrictions, and because there is so much media consumed and everyone wants to control their image. I think that makes it more difficult to tell those kinds of stories, especially when it comes to HIPAA rules and patient confidentiality and all of those things, and what a family member who didn't know that their loved one had passed yet, if they were to see an image or see video footage of their family member passing away before they even knew it. Those are things that I don't think that a lot of people understand, that have to be taken into consideration. On the offset of it, I don't know. John may be able to answer this better than I would as far as his experience with that.
I actually got into some hospitals and I got some pictures of stuff, but it was really tough. I mean, I was allowed to photograph some of the doctors and their, and their stuff, but I won't mention which hospitals, but a lot of the media people, they really didn't want you in there because of what Dawn said. There's a lot of rules and there's people in there. I mean, there's so much going on, and there's people sick. You don't have time to go up to somebody and say, hey, would you please allow this guy, to photograph you or something. There's all this kind of stuff is going on. And I always looked at it as the nurses and the doctors. I mean, they were just overwhelmed and so busy. And I tried to get what I could without trying to bother them. They had way more things to worry about, life and death, than me getting a photo. I mean, so I was trying to be really aware of that, but I did get to do some of that during the pandemic. Yeah, it was amazing.
Well, that is solid to know that we've captured some, and Dawn, thank you for clarifying what you had seen in your perspective. Well, at this time, this brings us to the end of this wonderful panel. I'd like to thank all of our panelists today. I'm going to call you up by name: Joon Powell, Dawn Majors, John Partipilo, Bill Steber, Ellen Armour, and Lucy Kalasova. Thank you all for your wonderful insights. I have a lot to think about, and you may be hearing from me with follow-up questions. This wonderful exhibit, Nashville, a Pandemic Observed, is going to be up until April 1st in the Vanderbilt Divinity School. And again, this has been a collaboration between the Religion and the Arts and Contemporary Culture Department, the Carpenter Program, the Jean and Alexander Hurd Libraries, and also the Vanderbilt College of Arts and Sciences. And we thank you for joining us tonight, and have a wonderful night.